Now, my life is based on many different layers. And today I will be focusing on one of my personal layers. This is also typical of the life of Richard Rogers, a long life that brought him and encouraged him to work in different systems, different environments, different cultures, if you will, and even different, partners, people, firms. So a life made of very many layers. Now, I would like to use the word trust when talking about architecture. I mean, we have to have trust in the works that he made. Now, we know that what architectural works say, well, they really take into account the way we look at them. For example, you look at an architectural piece or a building. Now, this is part of your life. This goes through time. It is here to stay. It expresses meanings that, for example, you didn't think of when you were thinking of the design of that work or of that building. So this is works or buildings offer us. They challenge our intelligence. They challenge the possibility we have to observe them. And from them, we take down plenty of key messages. We can think and rethink. We are, free of thinking whatever we want. So we can talk to the architect, we can talk to the building, and we can create a complete world around us. So when Richard Rogers comes back from the US, that was around 1963, and he got his, training in Yale, and there he sort of encountered the so-called American world. So the world of the eastern coast in the U.S. And once again, this is where he met and encountered the great architects that previously had turned California into one very intense place in terms of experimentation and architecture. Of course, I'm talking about those years where people think that we can really totally change the way people lived in the U.S. And this is what happened, actually, and radically in California. So this is a sort of a teaching. This is a lesson that Mr. Rogers, brings back to the UK. Now, in the UK, he creates Team 4. Okay, not a think tank, but Team 4. Team 4 with some of his friends. So young architects, of course, males and females, and in the Team 4, they managed to do something unprecedented, especially to their life as an architect. Now, a beautiful home in Cornwall. Now, this is much more than a building. It's an opportunity. It was an occasion. So this is something that you have to test, you have to experiment, you have to tamper with, and you have to create when you are an architect. Architecture is much more than shapes. It is represented by materials, technologies, commitment, engagement. You really, really have to come to terms to all of the complexities of a building. So this is sort of a training and experience that Mr. Rogers had when he was very young. And this is the, one of the milestones, but also one of the key, stepstones and steps forward in his career. So one major steps forward in the history of architecture of the second half of the 20th century. For example, other buildings in 1967, and then the Zip House. Now, the Zip House, the ZH, was a typical dream of that time. So sort of a, pre-made, prefabricated dwelling, timeless, placeless dwelling, and then new technologies put to the test. So some years later, in 1971, the unexpected success that he got in a special contest, the so-called Centre Pompidou Beaubourg in Paris with Peter Rice and Renzo Piano. So that was an incredible, breathtaking designer team. And members of that team came from the four corners of the world. And this was one of the key features of the way Richard Rogers used to develop and is still developing, all of these works. Because, if it is true that taking ideas from other people, having a broad, open mind, offering hospitality. This is, what we say in Italian. So we have to create a place where there's room and space for everyone. And by the way, this is the title of his book. I will be talking about this in a second. Now, this means that in our life, so in our, timeless, placeless profession, what we have to have is the opportunity to be strong, to work on energy, to be really, really very strong. So we have to, go through common places and go well beyond common places. And competencies and skills may come from very different places, unique places, different personalities and characters. I think that this is one of the key features of Richard Rogers. So I'm thinking of, the design some decades ago, and then, of course, the building of the Centre Pompidou in Paris. I think that, Richard Rogers expresses there the best concepts of his professional life. So after that really, really deep, unique experience represented by this beautiful, incredible building in Paris, he moved back to writing history. The Centre Pompidou at that time, people didn't really understand what it meant. And so much so that the building of this dwelling created so many problems and issues and debates. Let's say that people didn't like it at the very beginning because, there was a sort of a clash between the time the building was made and the content of the building. So it has taken years to really understand the beauty and the depth of that building. Men and women sometimes don't like to see the truth of the time that we live, the time we experience. Because, we use barriers, we put walls, images, pictures, screens between us and what is around us. So this was something unprecedented in Paris. The Centre Pompidou was representing a brand new epoch. And it was showing the reality of that time, that era. There were contradictions, there were aspirations, expectations. There was a huge, untapped, unexploited potential to capitalize. So the old rules of architecture were now included into our vintage box, so they belonged to the past. That at the end of the 1960s, all of these, let's say, new theories, new transformations, this is something people started, understanding. It was a different image, something really, really different, a big jump forward. A leap forward that no one before had done. This is the, the Centre Pompidou, and then many, many incredible buildings, the Lloyd's buildings in London, and then the court in Bordeaux in France is so innovative. Able to create very specific spaces in order to apply the law. And all of these spaces were really, really able to humanize this very important job. The law, the justice, and the rules and regulations that we have to abide by in our life. And then a beautiful port that Madrid wanted to buy. And Richard Rogers has interpreted all of this in an incredible, unique way. I think it's still today a pleasure to reach the airport in Madrid, Barajas, and there's an incredible sequence of colors. You can see the different colors of the wooden coverage, and then the roof, and then plenty of supports and buildings. It's really, really very welcoming. And these ports, or even airports in the case of Madrid, usually they are non-places. Finding these beautiful places when we travel around the world, this is something that only architecture can give us. I'm touching upon many different, points and highlights of the works of Richard Rogers, and this is what his buildings and dwellings still tell us. This is what they want us to think of. In 2000, Richard made a building that I am fond of. Maybe it is not the most liked one or appreciated one. I'm talking about the Lloyd's Register. I'm not talking about the previous, the old Lloyd's building, but it's a close by, nearby building built. It is totally transparent. It is 100% see-through, and it is so simple. So we go back to the basics. I mean, the basis of the culture that he, met or encountered in Yale, studying the big works of the top Californian architects, very essential. So Rafael Soriano, for example, or even Zahari in California, once again. So once again, this is sort of a closed-up, hidden, concealed building in a very small plot. But once again, 100% see-through, transparent, and it really bets and works on its transparency. I keep, looking at, observing this building. I stare at it, and I think of the title of one of the chapters of the book that Richard Rogers has written. So once again, he's talking about the face of Prince Charles. Maybe you remember that time where Prince Charles in the UK decided that, and I quote, modern architecture was the enemy of the cities, or the idea of a city. So Prince Charles reckoned that what large important sociologists and scholars had written since the 1920s was false, was a mistake. For example, Schönheit der großen Städte, so the beauty of the large cities, and I quote the title in German. This book was so important and so dear to Mies van der Rohe. So in that book, or sort of an essay from Handel, there's a sentence, and I quote: "Dreaming today, thinking that the city is something similar to a village, a small village. When the sun goes down, you start seeing small houses, and you can see the light inside every single building. This means you don't know our times. Our cities are different. This is another world. We live in a different planet today. The small homes with the lit windows, well, this is a dream that can be identified with, let's say, skin defects of the face of Prince Charles, because he thought that was his idea of a city. But Richard Rogers built the Lloyd's for a different reason. Even the Centre Pompidou, this beautiful building, the Lloyd's Register, was a sort of a response. I mean, the answer to many questions raised by Prince Charles. So no lit windows, rather modern architecture. So just think of the cities today, and this is, one of the key highlights of Richard Rogers, which is what he started doing when building the Centre Pompidou. So you think of a city, you may want to live in that city. And now, because we live in cities, of course, we don't have to give up anything. We don't have to renounce everything. We have to take into account and embrace all what cities offer us. So many things can be taught to us by cities. So thinking, rethinking, seamlessly thinking of cities where we can really deploy efforts, research, investigation, technology and development, so that cities can become a place for all. All the people living in cities live in our times, in our epoch. So you cannot give a place to everyone in our cities just by thinking of nostalgia. So the lit windows when the sun goes down. Our cities are complex, complicated, difficult. They are a big challenge. Just think of a city today. It's so difficult. And I think that Richard Rogers has played a vital role on this during his life. So much research and so many experiences. I mean, here he has reconfigured, re-engineered London. London now has a pace and a rhythm which is not just the let's say immediate exploitation of what the city offers. I mean, he really designed it. He redesigned it. He made a planning effort, and the main aim was making sure London can be a place for all. So Richard, as an Italian, comes back to Italy on a regular basis. This country, more than any other country, is so rich in public spaces. All of these public spaces we have here have been shaped not by architects, but by time, ancient time. We have so many places for all. The big lesson of Italy, which comes back in the thoughts of Richard Rogers every single day, about what Italian cities are. You know, every single time I introduce Richard, I feel sort of annoyed when I read that Richard Rogers is a visionary. No, no, no. Richard is a realistic person, a realistic architect. I mean, he lives, let's say, on the ground, not in the sky, not on a star. So he looks right in the face of our times. A visionary is a person that's a little, let's say, you know, far away, moving out of time, flying high. We don't know why and where. So a person who's really able to describe his life as an abstract, intangible life. Once again, we have different layers in the life of Richard Rogers, different layers in terms of architecture. And even places that Richard Rogers creates, they are based on layers. Our main squares, our piazza, the historical city centers, I mean, the beautiful streets, they are representing different layers, different, you know, civilizations, different types of stones, which is what happens in the coral reefs. And then time, you know, just like the low tide and the high tide, and then, you know, 1,000, 1 million times, you know, you discover all of these layers, and which is what you can see here in the Italian cities. So once again, this is a stratified time, so a time made of layers. This is something that I have learned from Richard Rogers, and this is the way I look at him. So I have just had the opportunity to learn from him so much more. This is Un posto per tutti, a place for all. This is the title of the book. You can get a copy here. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm advertising this book. Please buy it now. Then he will sign it. This book won't change our future, our life, or the turnover of the publisher. It won't change the life of Richard Rogers, but please do buy this book. It's a beautiful book, and here you can really, really understand the layers of life. You will read the book, you will find a friend, you will have the opportunity to think, and just like every great book, it will take you into the future. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you so much. It's a shock for me. Well, I thought it was a small meeting, maybe 20, persons, 40 persons, and then so many young people, 2,200 of you. Wow. Oh, thank you so much for this introduction. Now, this is what Francesco has just said. Let me define, what he said before. Okay, let me try and tell you something more than Francesco said already. This is something we already know as architects and as people. This is the truth. I will be talking about the book, which was published 6 months ago. It was published 6 months ago in the UK. Okay, let me be a salesman again. I didn't expect so many architects, so I do apologize because, sometimes I will be talking about some points that you may not be interested into. So all architecture is modern in its time. It's much more than what Prince Charles thought. For example, at the Lloyd's building in London, maybe this is a little better than Pompidou because for the Lloyd's building, I mean, some people said it's nice, okay, while for the Centre Pompidou, everyone complained. But, you know, Prince Charles is a little more than a newspaper. So we worked as a team for the Lloyd's building, so that was a big, big team. So, you know, my office is a real team. So it's not me, it's not my job. We have the, you know, engineers. I mean, without my colleagues, I couldn't do all of this, including Renzo Piano. Now, once again, I am in a team. So let me go back to this issue. What's style? Now, style, I think, is a very important thing. I'm not talking about the Baroque style, or, for example, a style typical of 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago. I don't care, because my style is what I do today. So all of the good architecture, in my opinion, is modern. And this started, you know, with some basic dwellings, including all of the incredible buildings we have today. Uses have changed a lot, and I will be talking about this.
Ok, capito.
Every epoch has beautiful products or things. So in 1300, you had, some of the projects from Brunelleschi. We are, of course, in the heart of Florence. So this is the number one engineer ever lived in the world. Today's problems are different than problems we had 6,000 years ago. This is what Francesco said before. I really like this sentence. It's okay. I won't read it again. I think it's very, very clear. Once again, Francesco, thank you for commenting. This this content. This is the real basis of my philosophy. So you have to leave cities not less but more beautiful than you found it. Some people say, look at this. This is St. Mark's in Venice, and I was there yesterday. So from this perspective, you can see that every building shows when it was built. Different epochs, different times, different styles. You have the wonderful St. Mark's Cathedral. This is really, really crazy. It's beautiful, but it's really, let's say, out of normal, as I like to say. But if you really think about our life, it is not normal either. And then you have the Palladius Library, which is so classic. Then you have recent buildings, and then you have the bell tower. If you build a bell tower like this today, no, this would be impossible. Because they would say, no, this is not good, it doesn't fit here. But now it is there. We all agree that this is the real center, the real focus of the piazza, of the square. But all of these buildings are unique buildings. But this is possibly the most beautiful squares in the world. So I came back from Yale. I was not a great student, okay? You have to know this. I met Norman Foster. He was excellent. So together with our wives, we created Team 4. Francesco said Team 10, but it was a Team 4, not a Team 10. So we are a community. We have to help those who are much less lucky than us. So the 4 of us at that time started selling projects to the public. So money was shared between the members of the team. We didn't want to do military buildings. It's always difficult to say yes or no, but you really have to understand what your responsibilities are. It's an important lesson if you really want to say that we are civilized people. What about social responsibility and equality? I cannot accept all of the differences that you can see today. Some people are really earning so much money, too much. Teachers don't earn enough, and there's too much money, earned by, businessmen or some large multinational organizations. I mean, this is something I cannot accept. Okay, I have 3 children, and you see one of my grandchildren here. I am now in the House of Lords in the UK, but then I left the party, when they decided to bombard Iraq. I didn't like it, I left. Okay, back to the Centre Pompidou contest in Paris, 1971. So Peter Weiss and Renzo Piano decided to step in. So we had a majority around the table, so we said, okay, let's do it. I said, well, this is going to be a sort of a building for a president. But at that time, I didn't want to do anything political. And it was the second projects in Paris after the end of the Second World War. And I said, well, this is a little too sad. No, I don't think it will work fine. And I have to say that the mass media, newspapers, they were terrible. So it was really, really terrible. Every moment in time, we were attacked by everyone. One day, I remember it was raining in Paris. It was at the end of the project. I met a woman. Okay, she was 20 years younger than me today, but for me, she was older. It's raining. And I said, do you want to come under my umbrella? Yes, thanks. And she said, do you know who made this? Okay, this is the biggest mistake ever. And I said, yes. And I got, hit with her umbrella. Okay. This is a house, a building in Creekville with Team 4 in Cornwall. No, it's not a question of being beautiful or not. For the first time, I got an award that usually they award for larger, bigger buildings. There was a team of 6 architects. It has taken 4 years, excellent customer. The customer lost the money. We lost the 6 years. We made 1 house. And while in the UK we needed to build 4 million apartments. So I don't think I did a lot for people. I really didn't give any contribution to civilization. Anyway, we decided to change direction. This is the zip-up house. And once again, Francesco has already mentioned the zip-up. This was a contest. We got the second place here. We have recycled refrigeration panels from trucks, 10 meter long, 2 meter high. So it was possible to buy this in a store. So you just take your car, you drive to the supermarket, and you buy these panels. And then with these, refrigerated panels, I mean, they were refrigerated panels, you can build the house. I like the colors. I see people dressed in black, and this is the only thing I don't like in my firm. Okay, people dressed in black. I like colors. Very small windows that we made very easily. So it was really easy to have hot, warm air inside, thanks to a very special insulation system, very well insulated panels. Then another keyword is flexibility. I will be repeating the word flexibility plenty of times. I mean, this is the central part of the house. You can change positions. I mean, this just like the walls you find in restaurants, so that you can really move or shift. On the right, you see the key concept of this house, and then a simple detail. Renzo Piano says it's really impossible to understand 100% of the details of a building. So you realize what to do when you do things. Sort of, learning by doing. So this is Wimbledon, not far from London. This is from my parents on a small plot. You can see here an example of flexibility. You can see the transformation and the transparency of the house. You can change everything inside. It's very flexible. I was helped by 3 architects to do this. So this is one of my key philosophies. I mean, transparency, which is also one of the key elements of Centre Pompidou. Okay, back to Centre Pompidou in Paris. Once again, that was a shock for us because I said, there would be only 30, maybe 40 participants in the contest, while in the contest there were 700 projects. So this is the basic of our idea. The building has to be a sort of a New York Times Square version, right in the heart of Paris. Don't forget, there was 1971. And it had to do, it had to be similar also to the British Library in London. So this is a place for culture, a place for the people. You can be there, you can be free to do whatever you want. There's a very big place, so a square close to the building. You can see here staircases outside. You can also use the facade to show pictures. You can see something political here, especially against Vietnam. Anyway, they didn't pay attention to this. So this is the finished building. This is what I mean by public space, which in my opinion is the most important role of architecture. So there have been so many people in and around the Centre Pompidou. So once again, Parisians really like to sit here, to walk around the building. They thought, and they still think, it's a toy, and they started using the toy, playing with the toy. Look at the map of the building, up right. This is twice as big as a football pitch, and there's nothing in the middle. So there are people, all outside the building, not inside. I mean, not yet. So, in my opinion, it's so important to, give the possibility to change something in and around the Centre Pompidou in Paris. People thought it was a library with something like 1 million books. But they started, digitizing the system. And, when we started thinking of this building, we thought it could, or it had, to contain up to 1 million books. Then they started, digitizing the books. And, the use changed immediately. And this still happens today. I mean, today, you design a building, you think of what may happen in that building, but then, of course, things change. And something different will be happening in that building. It's a structure that you can really adjust and adapt. You have a 3-story museum, you have a library, you have a design museum, and then you have the music floors. This is the section. You have people only in some sections, and then you have services and the main square on the front of the building. And this is something I really like. This is something that people told me in Paris. So thank you so much for this project, because you've given us this beautiful square, because in all the other projects, people or architects didn't think about the main square. And I said, thank you, that this is something I have learned in Italy. You can see here, a very dense, thick building, so that we can have room and space for the square. Now, this part is changing. Now, in a few years, they will replace all of these services. And, of course, we will change the air conditioning and the heating systems here. So we will use solar power and photovoltaic panels instead of diesel oil. And then motion. People want to move, and they want to see something when they move. So you can use all of these, let's say, tunnels. They are transparent, of course, with the escalators, and you can see what happens in the main square. I like this. Once again, look at the scale. So you can see here people and all of the pipes. Now, at that time, we needed all of these piping. Now, I like colors, and many people liked the colors. In my opinion, this is a normal color. So air conditioning is represented by a light, fresh blue. And then, the word exit is usually on a red background. We also included some yellow in Paris. So once again, back to the main square. When we started the Tate Gallery in the UK, it's sort of similar to the Centre Pompidou. It's a museum, anyway. I was president of the Tate for 10 years. So we started with 7 million people foreseen a year in Paris. This is the law courts in Bordeaux. This is not a prison, because usually, courts are built as if they had to be prisons. But you don't have prisoners in the court. You have lawyers and people working in the court. So there's another word I really, really like, democracy. Not just democracy for the people, but I like the slogan, democratizing architecture. We can build to democratize society, which is what you do in Italy. And then you have the cathedral close to this building, and then you have the Place de la Cathédrale, so the cathedral square on the other side. So this is a democratic building. This is for people. So it doesn't look like a prison. And you really need to understand what justice is. There's also a school there. There are faculties of a university. You have 7 different courts. You see one such court here on the right, and you have 7 rooms like this. This is a recent building. This is in Speyside in Scotland, in the UK. It's a whiskey place. It's a distillery. India, a very, very nice place. I mean, Scotland is really, really very beautiful. So many, many beautiful hills and mountains, and not too many people. We are. This is a hill. Okay, you see the hill now from here, but of course you can walk to the top of the hill and you look down. This is the way it looks like inside. And in my opinion, services give the scale, the shape, the form, even the warmth. So this is not something you have to hide underground. They give you colors, they give you feelings, they give you so many things. This is the Madrid airport. As Francesco said before, ports and even airports, especially airports today, are so important for me. Anna Karenina and even Tolstoy, great writers talk about great railway stations. So the picture you have here on the left, this was the Grand Central Station in New York. Very beautiful. The light is impressive there. So please go there, enjoy, well, not just, taking a train or moving, but enjoy the light that they have in the Grand Central Station in New York. And I said, well, let me try and do something like this. I mean, this was my inspiration. This is an incredible architecture, in my opinion. This really, reaches your heart. Look at Terminal 4 in Madrid. Well, I'm not talking about the passengers or the clients, but look at this, the movement of the roof, and then you have bamboo, and bamboo is so sustainable. It's a very good material. Back to colors. It's nice to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend if you are a girl wearing, beautiful colors. Or you may say here in Madrid, okay, let's meet at the red. This is what people say in Madrid. Now, red means from gate 6 to gate 63, for example. Back to London. Lloyd's of London. First building we made in London. After the Centre Pompidou. So after the Pompidou, I was jobless. Renzo Piano too, so we didn't know what to do. I went back to my large family in London, while Renzo Piano moved back to his beautiful city, Genoa, here in Italy. But we met regularly with Renzo Piano, and he gave so much, let's say, wealth and beauty to my life. Anyway, Lloyd's of London, the oldest insurance company in the world. They moved offices 4 times in less than 3 years. They told me, but we are not in the construction business. I mean, we are an insurance company, so we need to have a modern building, bringing us all the way to the next century. So a very flexible building, because we cannot move the offices once every year. This is it was the 5th tallest building in London. Now it's one of the lowest buildings in London. So everything changes. There's a relationship, between this building and many other buildings all around you. It depends. This is what people say, but because everything changes, you also see changing relationships between your building and the buildings all around you. So everything has changed. Renzo now has a Shard in London, which is much, much taller than this building. Anyway, this building is still there. It's still living quite well, and it fits with the environment.
City.
Now, the city in London is it was an old, ancient place. Narrow streets, irregular plots, totally different from what happens in the US. This was a simple, square, actually a simple rectangle. Now, in the Lloyd's, they have now understood that the digital era is, leading us into a new world. We could have done this with artificial, systems, digital systems, or traditional ways. It was really very difficult to foresee the change. And because they wanted a sustainable building, it was so difficult to imagine what would happen. So we had to, maximize and optimize the small spaces for the services that you can see here. And then on the top, there's a so-called horizontal window. Okay, back to a couple of questions. Now, this is what you see from, from the street. Of course, we don't have hills in London. Now, hills help you give, let's say, movement, motion to the building, but of course, we don't have hills in London. So in this case, the scale has to be much smaller, in my opinion. This is the first time we have used 3 different glass walls, so the so-called triple glass, for heating purposes. Here you can clearly see the concrete structure. You can also see all of the supports. This is the way you have to understand the building. Okay, so it's not a visual thing. It's an engineering building. And on the left, you can see one of the main service towers. This is the way it looks like inside. The second thing Lloyd said, we want to see people all the time, just like the old fish market. So there's a big hall, an atrium, with a very, very large window, and people working, talking, walking. There are many different floors. Some of these floors are for, let's say, business purposes. In other cases, you have ordinary offices where people work. When we talk about transparencies, we also have to talk about shadows. This is something they don't accept in the US. Anyway, you cannot have staircases, services, and elevators, lifts in the center of the building. Okay, look at this. This is the Greenwich Street Tower 3. So this is the map. This is ground zero, 70 floors. So here you have 12 meters for services only. You can only put walls one after the other. I mean, there's really no space to use your imagination. We usually use services. We put them outside so that you can really use and maximize, light and shadow. Otherwise, these buildings would be just a box. And this is really important. There's plenty of space and room inside to do whatever you want. For example, here you have the Lloyds of London, bottom and the center. These are some of our buildings. This is the most recent project in London. This is our office. Now, in the our our cities, as you can see here, will be sustainable, they will be smart, and they will be physical, they will be also virtual, and then there will be plenty of, overlapping structures. I don't think you have to live in a place, you work in another place, leisure in another place. Oh, no. Everything can be done and will be done in the same place. This means that, our future buildings will really be different than today's buildings. Now, this is the Leadenhall building in London, not far from the Lloyds. You can see here the St. Paul's Cathedral on the right. There's a sort of a corridor. Okay, so the corridor has to be kept, untouched or unchanged. And now the building on the left is from Norman Foster. So these are the Lloyd's offices on the one side, and then this is, as I say, my building with my offices on the other side. We did a couple of things, a sort of a cut. This helps you really identify the shape. And there's a big square here. You can see here, basically there are 7 empty floors. You can see here the square. And right here, behind you have all of the moving parts. So here there's a nice place. You can play, table tennis. You can eat on the go. And this is what happens inside. I mean, where we have the main green square. Now, there's plenty of flexibility. So we have even more space than I thought because there's so much flexibility. So this is another place in the piazza. And by the way, this is where I work. Let me talk for a second about planning new cities. Yes, I do plenty of, planning. I started in Barcelona, 30 years ago. And I wrote a book to plan the Houses of Parliament in the UK. And this is what I show, one of my favorite concepts. I mean, the city has to be quite compact because we're talking about sustainability. We don't have to use our cars to go to the office, which is good. If you want to meet friends in the city has to be compact. This is really very important, okay? And, there's a comparison here. This is a new town in the city. You can see here there was a plot. This is, brown field. This means that, it's a space that was, occupied already in the past. I mean, a brown field. And on the right, you have a new town. And this is a green field. There's plenty of space. Look at this. Look at how we planned it, or they planned it. This is not bad. This is Milton Keynes in the countryside. I mean, so in this case, everyone drives a car, so people don't meet each other, they just drive. Back to Florence many decades ago. I did 40 projects in Italy and 3 buildings, because, I mean, it's your political situation is always very complicated. Okay, you can see here the Ponte Vecchio in Florence. And we decided, I mean, they decided to use the, the 2 sides of the river. This was one of the projects, so the possibility to walk along River Arno, which is what they do in Paris along the River Seine. Well, there were many less cars, actually, but the view here is incredibly beautiful. This is one of the largest projects for Pudong in Shanghai. Now, all of this area, this one here in the foreground, and then on the background, you have the Bund, the old part. There are Italian, French, German buildings. I mean, it looks like Europe here. On the other side, you have very low buildings, maybe 1-2 story height. No bridges. So we decided also to design a bridge in order to get contact between these two, the 2 sides of the river, the 2 banks. Now, on the left, you can see the sprawling city. So there are no structures. It keeps growing, sprawling. You don't have green areas. And then you keep, moving out, reaching out to the countryside. The people don't talk to each other because they drive all the time. On the right, you have a compact city. So this is where you have the city center. You can see here the, black means that high density, blue is medium density, and light blue is a lower level of density, But there's this sort of, flower-like shape. I have a home here in Italy, in Pienza. Now, Pienza has a beautiful part. So you have the green area, then you have a big wall, and behind the wall you have the small village of Pienza. And this is a sort of a Pienza-like system or project. There was nothing, and this is once again Pudong in Shanghai, so we decided to have plenty of connections. So the Chinese built many buildings there, even before we finished our project. Chinese are excellent. So the idea was to have 6 clusters of buildings to host, 200,000 people in each section. So the total was 1.2 million people. So you can see a normal city on the right and a compact city on the other. If you have a compact city, you save 4/5 of the total energy. So you only use 1/5. Some people say that we have to do everything with bricks. Well, this is not true. So if you want, you can have bricks, 10 bricks, and then 1,000 bricks. This is an industrialized system. So these are very small apartments. It's sort of, prefabricated. You could, move and transport apartments by loading them onto a truck. This is at the Biennale in Venice 2 years ago. This is to, talk about the problems of the city, especially homes and typical city dwellings. We're now building less homes today than people built in 1922. So we don't have much social housing, and again we build less social housing today. This means that only rich people can live in London. All of the other people really have to move out. They drive 2 hours to work in the city of London. This is the tree house. So this is the key idea. We have a structure. It's sort of a composition. Every single box, every apartment goes onto a truck. We use wood. I really like wood. It's an excellent material. So there are some slogans and clear statements on the city, which is what you can read here on the wall, and here on the right you can see the industrialized, sustainable tower that you can see here on the right. So once again, I cannot understand why people are frightened of new ideas, because I'm frightened of old ideas. This is what John Cage, the musician, said. Thank you. This is it.